Back again. Here we are with this edition of the Wrap. Um, Kyle, what's going on, man? I know implementation team's been pretty busy. Got a lot of kind of high stakes implementations we're running right now.
Yeah,
What's going on in your area?
yeah, no, it's been busy. Implementation team's been head down doing some carve out stuff. So interesting time and some cool projects that we're working on.
Yeah, we've been seeing a lot more of them. I was looking at some data ahead of this. I think Q4 23 hit like all time high for percent of PE transactions that were carve outs is just under like 11%, which is kind of interesting. A couple macro dynamics happening, I think, with the cost of capital. You've got companies, maybe non PE owned companies, that are looking and saying, hey, how do we raise funding? Well, let's sell off some business units, right? So you kind of get that, and then you've
Yeah,
got the on the other side, as the PE owned companies, as the hold period is longer, they're kind of looking at anything they can do for EBITDA improvement, and one of those things, can be carving off underperforming business units, which doesn't mean that they'll forever be underperforming. It just may mean that it's non-core to that business and can actually be a great fit somewhere else.
yeah. If it's got
Seeing a
the
lot of those transactions.
Yeah, if it's aligned with the focus and kind of core to someone else's business, right? I think when cost of capital is cheap, you end up kind of bolting on a lot of things. You try different stuff in your business units and you expand, and then when cost of capital goes up, there's a tendency to start shedding some of those things and getting back to maybe it's kind of a little bit of an ebb and flow of creating a bigger core, but then kind of trimming some of those pieces and then fitting them to somebody else's core.
Yeah, we've been working those transactions for 5 or 6 years now. I did one of our first ones a few years, I guess 5 years ago now, from a large like Fortune 500 company. A lot of times we're carving them out from really really big businesses, which is cool.
Yeah.
That's been fun, but there's some high stress projects typically. Like I will say that for it. I've spent more late nights involved in carve out projects than any other ones.
For
Um,
sure. For sure. I mean, it's high stakes in that, under with TSA and the penalties of the agreement, making sure that you've done the actual carve out. There's a lot of moving pieces. It's a lot of aspects. It's not a single project or even really a single program, right? Within a particular domain of your business, it's an entire business, right? So everything from legal to operations to IT to to the actual people, like there's a ton of moving pieces that have to get thought about, a lot of decisions that have to get made in a timely and an efficient manner, right? And that can be um, a sense of shock to what becomes new co of that carve out, and so there's a lot of hey, we got you. Let's get through this. We've been here, we've gone through this kind of in the valley, we'll get you to the other side.
yeah, I mean, obviously we're focused on the technology aspect, and you know, we spend a lot of time talking about all the technology that we work on that is not network. But interestingly enough, in the carve outs, that's always one of the first discussions. We kind of refer to it as the long pole in the tent, so to speak. But it just really has to do with the delivery time frames. And you're
Yeah.
usually, at least in a lot of the ones we work, I mean, they're multi-location, oftentimes international. Like it's
Well,
it's a
it's
bear to
it's
run.
counterintuitive too, right? Like, I mean, especially for companies that haven't gone through that carve out process before, they're talking about what is typically more strategic products or strategic parts of the IT stack. And for us, we come in and we have to kind of educate them a little bit of, hey, we know that this piece is transactional, but it is a linchpin or a huge hurdle if you don't do it right. You're going to end up, everything kind of rides on your network. So if your network's not there come timeline, you're gonna be in a world of hurt. So we have to reorder the conversation a little bit and educate clients sometimes on, hey, let's knock this piece out because of that delivery time frame, that it takes to get there.
Another interesting trend we see is, so in a carve out, you're carving out this business unit, and oftentimes they're sizable. I mean, they may be 200 million, $500 million in annual revenue by themselves, right? But you're reevaluating your whole operating model specific to IT. And it's not something where you're organically growing that over time. All of a sudden, there's coming a day, which is rapidly approaching in the future, where you have to have an IT team of some sort, right? Whether it's a mix of, in-house, outsourced, third party, whatever that is. And so that piece, evaluating the whole operating model, is something that has taken a lot of center stage in that. And what it's resulted in is a lot more MSPs, whether it's you were just talking about the network, whether it's simply like a managed edge, like, hey, look, we're getting carved out of this multi-billion-dollar company. They had an in-house NOC, they had an in-house network team, all of that sort of stuff. We're not going to recreate that on just this business unit. So
Yeah.
how are we going to replace that? How are we going to manage it? um, and oftentimes that means either niche MSPs managing just components, like something like a help desk focused one, or network edge focused one. Oftentimes they're not pulling a security team over with them, right? So you get a managed security service provider. Like this MSP landscape and how it impacts the operating model is a really center focus of a lot of these engagements right after the network.
Yeah. Well, and I think you bring up a really interesting point, and something that's super super important um, in a carve out that we see, and it's this delicate dance between how much of what we had before do we just copy and paste, and how much do we change in that transaction moment. How much of it do we just acknowledge that it does need change, but we copy it over with a you know with a roadmap that says, hey, in a year or whatever we are going to change. um and there isn't necessarily one right answer in that, right? Like each of that is kind of a decision. That's why I was talking about, like, there's certainly the project management aspect of, like, hey, how do you go through the kind of step by step process of a carve out. But one of the key pieces of this is decision making, right? And you've got a lot of decisions to make, and decisions that are very impactful both in the near term in the carve out, as well as like setting up that company long term. Because as you talked about, there's things that you can't recreate from being that large company, something you had in house, to being a smaller company. You also have to think about the leverage that you had with your providers that you no longer have, right? If you were this massive company, you may had an actual direct account team, or direct support team, or you had some kind of leverage with your vendor. Now you're a drop in the bucket, or something much smaller, so like that may change. So there's a lot of decisions. I think some of the things that we recommend, on again, kind of case by case, is even if it's not necessarily the perfect solution, you don't necessarily want to go reinventing your business while in that transition moment, right? You want to acknowledge it. You want to do some of that diligence and some of that thinking of, okay, yeah, this one is on the roadmap. We can make it work for the next year. What we'll do is we'll just lower our contractual commitment, mitigate some of our contract risk, and then put it on a roadmap to change later. This one, like, nope, it needs to be new day one. Like, we've got to get to something
Yeah.
different. So like there's a lot of decisions in that, a lot of thinking about, how do you navigate that.
Yeah, you really have to be thoughtful about how much transformation you bite off, which is really what you're getting at.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Because you bite up too much, and you'll you'll choke on it come
Yeah.
timeline.
Yeah, it's been a really great space for us. I mean, I think all the data is saying that it is carve out transactions are going to continue climbing. It's been great for us. I mean, they're challenging to deliver in, but that's kind of like one of the things that separates us. When we look out at the market and we talk about what differentiators we have, like, you know, delivery in high stakes environment is a lot of it. I mean, we use a backwards planning methodology, which is important because we're planning backwards from a TSA
Yep.
exit. Our implementation and just the level of commitment we bring there is a huge differentiator. So it's been a great space for us. And all the data says those transactions are going to continue. So, have enjoyed seeing your leadership of the implementation team over there, and wrangling these engagements, and then ensuring we deliver. And then the engagement team has really grown in their capability and capacity to strategically advise in those spaces. So been a great area, will continue to be, and
Yeah, looking forward to doing more of them.
Yep. We'll go ahead and take a break and be right back after this.
After these short sponsors.
Back again here for an education session. Cue the school bell. And today, Kyle is teaching Kyle, but KG is teaching me. Kyle, what do you got queued up? I think you got something around edge computing.
Yeah,
VDI?
talk edge computing and a little bit of VDI.
Let me get my notebook out.
Yeah, class in session. So in order to talk about edge computing, I think we need to talk about a little bit about compute. And in order to talk about compute, you got to talk a little bit about infrastructure, right? As you think about why, like the use case of this, right? And we'll keep it pretty high level and just understanding the pieces that go into it and why it makes sense for businesses and where it applies. So when we think of infrastructure, it usually comes down to call it five key components, right? In any infrastructure type conversation, whether you're talking about cloud, whether you're talking about VDI, whether you're talking about edge computing, and so those five key components are data, compute, your end user, which is one that some people don't think of in their IT stack because it's not the actual technology. And then the transport between those things, right? How are you transporting between where your data is or where your data is being generated to the compute, which is the brain that processes it, and then your end users or your endpoints that consume it. So transport being the fourth, and then security, which is kind of this all encompassing, how are you securing each one of those components, securing your transport all the way from, end user to where your data resides. So that's, the kind of five components that we think about, and where are those located, geographically, has a tendency to impact this conversation. And so as we talk about edge computing, what you're doing is taking, if you're going take a cloud model, right, where you've got, your data is in the cloud, and that's when we talk data, usually what we're talking about is like, where is your data stored? In the instance of edge computing, we're actually talking about where is your data being generated. So it's still a data conversation, but generated versus stored. And what you're doing is moving the compute towards where that data is being generated. So, typical use case for this is like IoT or sensor type data that's generating a ton of data that needs to be processed. And so instead of taking that data and then backhauling it all the way to, what is a data center or your on-prem stuff, or even in the cloud that's, far away, and you've got that latency between where the data is being generated and where it's being processed. You're moving that brain power closer to where that data is being generated, which reduces that latency and has a more, kind of real-time effect to, drive this, kind of automated decisions or automated processing. So that's really kind of high level edge computing, right? And you would still have, so maybe, you process that data, or you're gathering, so you gather that data via some type of sensors or IoT, and then it's getting processed. The brain power is taking that data and doing something with it to make decisions, and then you may take what you've processed and then go store it in a database somewhere, and that can be back into a more centralized cloud environment. But you're taking the again, that brain power, and the closer you move it to where the data is being generated, the faster that you can have those decisions and kind of response times.
All right. So, I mean, I understand the impact from a latency perspective. And kind of a couple immediate thoughts. I guess the thing that's ultimately enabling this is the size of the compute resource is decreasing. But why? Like, what's the benefit to actual, doing the data processing much closer to where it's at? I mean, is it because you're pushing the decisions that ultimately come out of the data processing back, and it's just preventing, I mean, is it a speed thing? Like, why are people choosing to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple components. One is the speed, right? So this is typically applicable for things that are real time, and where you want that real time processing of your data to drive some type of decision or some type of action. So where latency is affecting it. And then there's cost implications, right? To be able to do that, where in both kind of directions, where if you were to try to do that all in your central processing, well, in order to do that, you've got to have like much bigger transport pipes all the way through. So like you've increased cost in your transport in order to handle some of that processing, further into your cloud environment versus pushing it closer to the edge, which is closer to where your stuff's being generated. So I think those two are really how you design the transport has an effect of it, and the real time need or real time decision making of that data being processed closer to where it's being generated.
It's an interesting dynamic given, I feel like people have been pretty focused on moving things off premise for quite a while now. And now we're talking about actually pushing resources back to the edge, presumably the premise. I
Well,
guess
so I would still say
yeah,
it's in a cloud, right?
yeah.
So you have, even whether it's your public cloud, private cloud, and some of these other providers, right? Like you can still keep, like I think your public hypervisors actually have some of the largest edge computing footprint out of anybody. Um, right. And so you can actually get kind of benefits of both, where you're still keeping this from an administrative perspective, from like building perspective. You could keep it with your cloud provider, right? Whether that's whether even in like a colo that has a private cloud or whatnot, they usually have some type of edge network, or a public hypervisor. Uh, and so, you could still be in a, called a cloud environment. But the resource that you're leveraging for that particular compute is just closer to where your data or where your IoT or whatnot is. So you're getting the benefits of cloud without having to bring it back on prem. And again, you're not necessarily having to rack and stack servers yourself, or deal with any of that hardware. And so, again, it's a little bit of best of both worlds.
So it's potentially regionalized. Like the edge doesn't actually have to mean your edge. It doesn't actually have to mean, it can just mean a closer location to you than what you would be doing otherwise.
Correct. Right. So, and yeah, I mean, it's somewhat relative, right? Where, instead of pulling it all the way to, what is, what is, US East 1, which is like their North Virginia region. Maybe you're in the actual state where your stuff's being transferred, right? Or you're in a region where it's much closer. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like sitting in the physical building with you, but it's closer to where your actual data is being generated.
Okay. Something I know we've been, looking at a lot and having a lot of conversations with clients about is VDI. Like how can you just talk to me a little bit about that? Because I mean, it's kind of a version of this, a little bit different, obviously not IoT application, but I think that some of the same technologies enabling this and creating an opportunity for VDI to actually be a little bit more, realistic and attainable
Yeah.
at
So
scale.
it comes back to those same five key components, right? But just in a different fashion, where in edge computing, what you were doing is really taking a brain that was in a central environment, whether it's in your cloud or data center, and pushing it closer to the end user. And VDI, you're kind of almost doing the opposite, right? What was the brain was on the physical laptop or physical tablet, and what you're doing is you're taking that brain and pulling it off of that hardware and pushing it into a centralized environment that you can access via the internet or web application. And so a couple of things with that, for there's security implications where there's no data or anything that's actually living or being stored on that end device. It's an image that you're accessing. So the moment you cut that image off, that tablet's kind of a dummy tablet, or that laptop's kind of a dummy laptop that doesn't have access to that information anymore. So from a security perspective, there's some benefits there. From a hardware perspective, if you think about, well, brain power is typically expensive, right? Computing resources, so the type of chip, the type of storage, all the pieces that go into it. Well, I don't really need any of that because I've pulled it out and put it in here. I just need to access it through an internet browser. So the type of resource I need at the edge or on premise, walking around with, is much lower. So my cost to my hardware is lower. And then, again, when you think about what are these five pieces, the linchpin is typically the transport. Because now, in order for this to actually be feasible, I need a level of bandwidth where, you think about what you're accessing. Your operating system or your laptop is a virtual laptop that's actually in the internet, or on the internet, essentially, that you're accessing through a browser into your window. And so all of that becomes latency sensitive, because it's not the operating system is not actually sitting on your tablet or your on your laptop. So again, it's all these these kind of components of secure. How do I secure it? The transport, what is that? What is a ramification or second, third order effect of that decision? And so for VDI, the main one that I think about, is whether this is feasible, is what is your transport, or what does your bandwidth look like in order to facilitate that?
I may have to circle back and maybe do another session on VDI specifically. I haven't looked lately at the data on like what the CAGR is of that technology and of providers that are doing it, but have to believe that as high speed transport just becomes more ubiquitous, and security is higher and higher in need. Like these things merging, I think, are going to lead to um, a lot higher adoption. It's something where, I think people have been projecting some of that for years, but there's reasons, feel like a lot of technology leaders don't embrace it, or if they do, it's only in certain use cases.
Yeah, I mean, there was one more as a saved around here, where you think about, if I was to deploy, laptops on premise, and then the end user has a problem with that laptop, you're typically having to like troubleshoot, and maybe even have to be on site, or control it remotely, and like it's this operational overhead, to support those endpoints or those devices. Whereas if it's kind of a dummy laptop, then you could have a couple of them stored in a closet. And again, it's just an image. There's an image sitting in your hosted environment that, like, you can refresh, or like, okay, this one's broke, let me spin up a new one. And again, if the tablet's broke, okay, just go grab another one that's much cheaper than the $1,000 or multi-$1,000 ones that have higher level of resources on them. So it becomes a little bit easier to administer, from administering IT support, and then just getting people access to it.
Yeah, I've also seen ways to save costs by basically doing, you know, end user profile or role based imaging, where based on exactly what that type of role in your organization needs, you're really scaling back the compute resources, and then for others, you may have higher, like you may even have higher than what they would typically get on a laptop, even, right? You can kind of have these super compute users, whether it's your business analyst or whatever it is, right? But people you want running larger programs and having more compute resources, but then you optimize it really for the role, and control all your SaaS application deployment, inside of that. Been some pretty attractive kind of financial results from doing that, but it does take a lot of thought and planning. Like
Yeah.
you really have to understand what the end users really truly need, plan for it well, like build your roles, build your use cases, and then deploy it. So that's super interesting stuff there. We may end up doing another session on VDI. I think there's a lot to talk about there, even at a macro level, not just a technology level, about why some people are embracing it, why others aren't, and where the market's going on that front. Because just pieces around it that are heavily impacting it.
Yeah.
Cool. Good stuff. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
I will consider myself schooled on that. All right, cool. We'll take a quick break and then come back for listener submitted questions. Back for the final segment of today's show. We've got questions. We got at least a question. Kyle,
We got a question. That's for sure. All right, so we got a question, and it is this individual has 400 globally distributed locations. They're looking at doing, called a network transformation, moving from MPLS. This is globally distributed 400 locations on MPLS currently today. Looking at moving to SD-WAN. It looks like they may have already started evaluating Versa as a potential solution, but they're looking for insights and understanding what are the key considerations and challenges as you approach this type of project and procurement activity.
Okay, cool. So I mean, that big deployment to start. I guess I would say, and it's global in nature. So I mean, quite a big project that they've got, and they're out there trying to figure out, where the pitfalls are, and there's a lot of them in one that size. So I guess the pieces of information we maybe don't have, and probably the most important one I would start with, is where are their applications hosted at? If I'm making some assumptions, I mean, they're on MPLS across this many locations. I could probably in a colo or on-premise data centers, most likely. I guess they could have some. I mean, an organization this size, I'm sure, probably has some cloud environment. So maybe we'll just assume kind of a hybrid, compute environment essentially on MPLS. And so today maybe they have some like cloud gateways or things like that with MPLS. I guess I would start there. I guess just as far as any other information that may be valuable, but we don't have it, so we'll just make an assumption. And the other piece is an organization this size. I'll make an assumption that they're going to manage this edge in-house. They may not. They could do it with a carrier or they could do it with a third party, but I guess I'll make the assumption that they're going to largely do this. And even kind of the nature of the question, right? Like they're looking at it and saying, hey, we're going to be doing this deployment. So a couple pieces there. What I would maybe start with, I'll just start with Versa specifically as the technology. So it is an edge-based technology, but assuming they actually have some cloud environments or some things like that, you can run virtual instances to get a POP-based feel essentially. So you can deploy basically virtual instances of Versa out to kind of what you were talking about earlier, actually a little bit of the edge, so to speak, although not your premise. It can just be globally distributed, which will be important in a global organization like this. Like if you just did an edge-based SD-WAN deployment in an organization like this, I think you're really going to struggle, to control the middle mile, and that's going to feel much, much different than a global MPLS network. If you were only regionally based, or if you were purely, domestic, even you could maybe get away with that. But given that you're a global MPLS today, you've probably got a lot of QoS on that. You've probably got a lot of, really control over this middle mile in your network, and Versa being edge based, unless you kind of push it out to some pops. It's going to feel very, very different. I'm also making the assumption that they're going to change the underlying network, the access to DIA and or broadband. I'm making that assumption based on cost savings. They mentioned cost savings, so I'm making the assumption that they're going to change the underlying access. That will also give them, flexibility for sure as they turn up new sites or turn down other sites, and potentially improve performance. On the WAN optimization, maybe not. As far as security, visibility, like in control, likely it will be, a little bit more than their global MPLS. I'm kind of making the assumption that, they're kind of all in with the provider right now doing this. So I guess just some initial thoughts specific to kind of key considerations and challenges. I'll start by going back to the applications. Um, Fortunately, Versa is one where you can use MPLS as one of your access mediums, and that's important because if you weren't doing that, then what you would need to do to start is deliver a different type of access. Specifically to any locations that are hosting applications, right? Because you've got to get that there first, and then you'd have to be running two networks at the same time. With Versa, given that you can use MPLS as an access, you can go ahead and deploy Versa to those locations that are hosting applications, whether they're your premise, whether they're colo, or whether they're cloud, right, where you could use a virtual environment, and then start planning for your other locations to come on over time. So you cut down your MPL, deliver your Versa, overlay the MPLS, and then bring the circuits in. So you're kind of removing this key dependency that you would have otherwise, where you've got to go deliver the circuit, then deploy the SD-WAN. In this case, you can actually deploy the SD-WAN and then move the circuits underneath. However, like the key thing, and this would be a pitfall for sure, is that is going to impact your financial modeling, right? You're not going to have this end to beginning relationship. You are going to have this overlap. And this is a miss that we've seen organizations make a lot of times where they do not project enough overlap. I think companies want to put together this business case that says, hey, we're gonna have 30 days of overlap. No, like not at all. Like I just imagine just one tiny gotcha on this, right? As an example, let's say that this is a global MPLS network with Orange. We've got to have a 60-day disconnect notice for MPLS, right? So
Yeah.
that right there, and you're probably not going to want to submit that before you know that that circuit is delivered and running and functional. Otherwise, you could potentially have business disruptions. So, what I would advise them to do is to not overlook the amount of time that they are going to be, you know, running, basically running and managing two networks, right? But also the access cost underneath, they are going to have overlap here. And so you need
Yeah.
to be really dialed in on the delivery and then everything that happens afterwards. The other thing I would say is we see a lot of times we'll come into organizations after they've done this and we go run an audit and they are still being invoiced for a lot of these MPLS services that they felt like they would have disconnected. And that really hampers the ability to deliver on the financial projections, which is one of the reasons, is actually the number one reason to achieve cost savings that they listed. And so, you've got to watch that really closely. It's there. The savings are there against a global MPLS network, 100%. But you really need to factor in for some in-year cost on, the cost to deploy this, the cost to manage it, and, basically, you know, some level of overlap. Um, I'll pause there.
Is
I've
it
got
is
many
it fair
more
to say
thoughts.
that if I reflect on what you're saying, is it fair to say there's a difference between, call it the technology overlap versus the billing overlap, right? Because I think sometimes when I hear clients talk about it, they're thinking like, well, yeah, we're just gonna, we'll be on our MPLS and then we'll have this cutover date and we'll flip the switch. And in their mind, like they're thinking the billing is somewhat in lockstep with that. And as what you're describing is that's not actually the case. Like just because you cut over your traffic, you still have, even with that, you still have a lead time to then disconnect whatever legacy services, assuming that you don't have any kind of contract liability there that would prohibit it or make you have to have even longer overlap. um, because I think you don't even really want to necessarily submit that until you've done that cutover and made sure everything's working correctly, and then want to process it, right? Because if you tried to get too crazy with it and you're like, oh well, we're gonna start the disconnect process a little bit ahead and try to time it, like I've seen those go horribly wrong where for whatever reason the cutover doesn't happen or the circuit's not ready or whatever is not ready, and you've already put something into motion, and so really you don't even start that until after the cutovers happen and you've accepted it as, yes, this is working.
Yeah, 100%. There's a couple other pieces on it. This many sites, I think I would encourage them to think about these sites and come up with essentially topology templates, right? You've got a couple of key types of sites, and we've done them kind of using the precious metals model, right? Like a bronze, silver, gold type of thing. Maybe you even have a platinum, right? Where you've got locations that are hosting applications, right? Well, like maybe you're going to deliver 2 DIA circuits to them, or maybe even like a, if you're an organization this size, like you may have multiple of those, and you're going to do 2 DIA circuits and potentially even still like point to points between a couple of them. So you've kind of got this core corporate network that's out there. And then you've got maybe headquarters locations, really central, can't go down, need high availability, high redundancy, high resiliency. Then, beneath that, we'll say silver, right, where it's based on a user count or something like that. And then you may have things that are branch offices, where like they're just, if they went down for a day, it's just not that business impacting. The users can do something else, right? So I would encourage them to think about that and try to profile their sites, and then actually go into essentially a proof of concept, including each of those sites. Obviously after they control the core corporate network. Um, but that's been a pretty good kind of methodology for how to ultimately tackle this many locations and put them into some sort of framework that's manageable. And then you have your delivery model by site, um, which has been a pretty positive way to ultimately, kind of this one bite of the elephant at a time type of thing, but to bring it into some sort of framework that's controllable and manageable. So that's been pretty positive too. I guess the other thing I would say, in closing on this is there are people like Resourcive. I obviously think we are the best at this, but there are organizations like Resourcive that do this all day, every day, and can come alongside companies that are doing this and really be, not only an advisor but an execution partner in going about this. So I would suggest that with a project this size, they engage someone that has done this before, does this every day of the week, and really is their profession, because there's a lot of us out here that do this. So
Yeah.
that's my thoughts about that. Hopefully it's helpful. It's a great project, and look on the other side of it. It will deliver a lot of the things that they're looking for. I wouldn't underestimate the challenge ahead of them. These are challenging projects, but you know they're going to happen. Like, I mean, that company's not going to be on MPLS in 5 years globally. Like,
Yeah.
that's just not realistic, right? So this project is absolutely out ahead of them. Just go in eyes wide open as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, good stuff. Appreciate the insight there.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
All right. I guess that's a wrap.